Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and I'm so delighted you've joined me this evening for part 2 of our story. If you haven't heard part 1, make sure you click on the description because you don't want to miss out on the entire story. I'm thrilled you've joined me tonight, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and do share the videos with anybody who you think might enjoy them. So let's get started with part 2 of our story tonight. I hasten to say the meal that evening was fraught with tension. I could see that Claudia did not thoroughly enjoy the obtrusive, rather invasive spotlight of my father's scrutiny on her the whole time, but she stood up to him very impressively, and I was proud of her for that. I had taken my father surreptitiously to one side and told him to quit while he was ahead, or I'd be driving back to Boston with Claudia forthwith. So he held his tongue. But that weekend was not the most favourable, as there was an uncongenial ambience in the cabin, of silent words left unspoken. My father eyed Claudia through stubbornly suspicious narrowed eyes, as if he thought that beneath her charmed veneer lay a rotting personality that was clandestinely being concealed from me. I was in love with Claudia, and I wanted to marry her. We had talked about it often enough together. But I knew such a revelation would go down like a lead balloon with my father. If he had his way, neither of his sons would get married at all, for it would seem he was absolutely convinced we'd end up marrying women who'd be treacherously deceitful, engaging in all manner of love affairs behind our backs, and buggering off into the sunset like his insouciant, self-centered mother had done, leaving us to take care of our bewildered children. My father could not stomach both of his sons ending up in this desolate situation, the same one he'd experienced as a boy. I was naturally indignant with my dad for his abrasive, rather caustic treatment of my girlfriend, but she solicitously took me to one side and told me she could see my disgruntled father was deeply scarred and wounded from the pain of his past, and was being naturally protective towards me. "Think about it for a moment, Harris, and be reasonable. If you had a rough ride, a tumultuous one at that, in your childhood, and had been beaten, bullied, battered and bruised emotionally by your own mother, wouldn't you do your damnedest to protect your children from heading down a similar path?" I growled. "But I don't appreciate the way he treated you. He gave you the 3rd degree, virtually interrogated you." "I understand why he was cynical," said Claudia, "and I don't blame him either. Your father was being so precautionary, for he wants the very best for you. And you know what? I completely respect him for that." Claudia was right. My dad was looking out for me, even if I did disagree with his prickly approach towards Claudia. My father had warned the both of us, often enough, that we would likely make the very same mistakes he had done, and his father before him. "It's a given," said my father, "that children repeat the mistakes of their parents. They don't want to, of course, but they invariably often do. If you come from a divorced family, for example, the statistics show that you are 3 times more likely to get divorced yourself. If your parents were addicted to drugs, you're more likely to become addicted to narcotics. If your father was an alcoholic, you are 3 times more likely to end up turning to drink when life gets the better of you." "I understand what you're saying, Dad," I had said to him. "But believe you me and Winston, we'll make sure we marry decent women. You don't need to worry about us." When me and my girlfriend returned to Boston, she was happy to get away from my dad because she felt as if she could breathe again. But despite everything, she liked my dad a lot. She said his love towards us could not be doubted. "I'm so sorry, Claudia. I had no idea my father would be so rude to you." "I feel desperately sorry for him, Harris, if you must know. Your dad is a man who's hurting. He's had lousy experiences with women that run deep. It's a challenge for him to trust anyone," she kept reminding me. "He's only looking out for your interests. You need to appreciate that, Harris, before you come down on him so hard." "Even so, he didn't have a right to ask you about drugs and alcohol. That was way too over the top and uncalled for. But well done to you for standing your ground." "Your father's bark is a lot worse than his bite," she chuckled. "What did you think of the photograph I showed you of my mother? The one with the black eyes? Claudia shivered in disgust. "If you want my opinion, Harris, your mother looked possessed in that photograph. I have never been so creeped out by a picture in my entire life. The expression on her face, that soulless look, it reminded me of a menacing gargoyle. She looked demoniacal." "What do you mean exactly?" "Oh, I don't know how to put it. I mean, the face in that photograph. It didn't look like her, did it? It looked like someone else. It was like there was a demon living inside her. It gave me the chills. It literally made my blood turn cold." 25 years later, after my father's death of a massive coronary arrest, I was a broken man, as was my brother Winston, for our father had been our entire world growing up, and his grievous loss was completely devastating to the both of us. I missed him dreadfully. My heart ached for him, and Claudia, who'd grown to love him over the years, along with my children, were equally as shattered by his demise. I had taken on the onerous job of cleaning out some of my father's stuff in my childhood Blue Ridge Mountain home, which held within its stoic foundations wistful, treasured memories of our boyhood days, spent with our beloved father, fishing, hunting, horseback riding, whitewater rafting, skiing, and exploring. I was now valiantly deciding what to keep of my father's, what to throw out, and what to donate to charity. Me and my brother Winston had saliently decided to keep our Blue Ridge Mountain home and use it as a holiday escape for our respective families, so that our children would come out and enjoy the mountains, as we had done as children. We didn't want to deprive them of those pleasures that we had taken for granted growing up as young boys, as our children growing up in a city would miss out on so much. My brother now lived in Philadelphia with his wife Patsy and his 2 kids, Kate and Harry. I was now living in Boston with my wife Claudia and our 2 children, 8-year-old James and 6-year-old Sasha, as my wife, who was incredibly close to her family, didn't want to live too far away from her parents in Boston. My brother Winston, who could be much more emotional and sensitive than I was cut up about my father's death, so much so that he couldn't bear to go through any of his stuff. He reckoned it would give him a complete meltdown. So I had taken it upon myself to studiously go through his personal belongings. I didn't like looking through his stuff, but someone had to do the job. I didn't want to throw away anything that could be precious to the family or of sentimental value. I was shocked, somewhat disquieted, and rather confounded to discover that my dad had surreptitiously hired a private investigator to find out all about my wife Claudia's background, and likewise my brother's wife's background. I found myself reading the reports. The detective had determined that there was no dark side to my wife Claudia or my brother's wife, for they had never cheated on their boyfriends, had favourable character references from both family and friends. "Dad," I said to myself under my breath, "you went to all this trouble on our accounts. You were so worried the women we were marrying were not legitimately decent people." I realised then and there that my father's hang-ups about women rarely did run deep. Claudia had been right about that. I do recall Claudia telling me at one point in our relationship, when we announced to everybody that we were getting married, that she sensed she was being followed by a strange idiosyncratic man in a Burberry raincoat, who appeared to be a tad clumsy, tripping over his shoelaces all the time and haphazardly bumping into people. The man bore an uncanny resemblance to the lovable Detective Columbo in the old 80s detective series. Even his mannerisms were exactly the same. He was asking all kinds of impertinent questions about Claudia to one of my wife's good friends, who he interrogated. He appeared to have rocked up at the party my wife was attending, uninvited. She had thought the man had to be the host's father. She was to find out later that that was not the case. The man appeared to be smoking cigarettes. He was eyeing my wife from a distance, and asked Claudia's friend if Claudia had ever cheated on a boy before, and she had asked the man, "Why are you asking such personal stuff about Claudia?" "Well, you know, she looks like a sweet lass, doesn't she? But you know what they say. It's the quiet, demure ones you need to watch." "For your information, sir," Claudia's friend had told the detective indignantly, That girl is the most loyal woman you could ever hope to meet. I know that because I know her very well. She'd never ever cheat on anyone." The man had nodded.
"You know what, ma'am? I do believe you were right about that," he said, tapping his nose. "Your secret is safe with me. She looks like a nice sort, doesn't she?"
Everything was now making perfect sense to me. I was extremely thankful that my father over the years had accepted my wife with open arms and told me he was happy I was marrying Claudia.
"I think you've got yourself a very good woman there, son, and I really do like Claudia. I don't believe she'll ever let you down." "What makes you say that, Dad?" I'd asked him quizzically. "I thought you were extremely suspicious of her. Why this sudden change of heart?" "Let's just say, I think, son, that I feel reasonably assured that she's a very good person," he had said. "And isn't that all that matters?"
I now know why he felt reassured about my wife. The private detective had given him a positive confirmation about her integrity, and that had calmed down his angst significantly. As I pondered very reflectively over all these things, I began collecting some of my dad's books from the bookshelves, putting them in a box to give to charity. My father had been an avid reader when he was alive, and had tons of detective novels that I'd be offloading at the local charity shop. Then all of a sudden, a thick black leather-bound book fell at my feet. I retrieved it from the ground. What is this, I thought, sifting through the pages, realizing it was a diary that my father had written, around about the fortuitous time my mother had died. I recognized the messy, squiggly scrawl. Would it be so wrong to look at what he'd written, or would that be invading the private thoughts of a dead man? There was so much about my mother I did not know. If I could just skim through the diary, I might find some answers to the enigmatic questions that had hung over my childhood, that had loomed over my life like an ambiguous dark shadow. The diary's first page almost certainly had my hair standing on end. When I read the entry, I figured my father had written all this down, for he was unable to share his secrets with anyone, and writing stuff down in a diary probably brought him a measure of comfort. July 1966.
"There are no words. I'm in absolute shock. It has happened yet again. My wife tried to drown little Harris in the bathtub this morning. I cannot imagine what would have happened to Harris if I had not been walking past the bathroom at the exact time that this happened. I had heard a splashing sound, and there my wife was, willfully thrusting my 3-year-old boy under the water, and there was a look of such venom on her face. "What the hell are you doing?" I said, dashing over to the bathroom to help rescue my son. The mind boggles that my own wife would attempt to murder my son. As I was retrieving Harris from the bathwater, he was spluttering, choking, wheezing, gasping for breath. I began to comfort a howling child. Then Sophia flung me to the other end of the bathroom, so I fell back on the tiling rail, hitting my head hard against the tile walls of the bathroom, with Harris still in my arms. I developed a bruise on my head, the size of a golf ball. It was like the kind of powerful blow I would expect to receive from an altercation with a man, certainly not a woman, and certainly not my wife. To my horror, a raspy growl came out of my wife's throat, and she hissed at me contemptuously. Her eyes grew as black as coal. All kinds of perverse words came out of my wife's mouth, which I cannot even write in this diary, for the words were obscene, and were spoken to me in Latin. I did not recognize the person my wife had suddenly become. I grabbed little Harris, running from the bathroom as fast as I could. I cannot remember a time when I was more afraid. I took my 2 children to their grandfather's house to spend a few days with him, to ensure their safety. I told him that my wife and I were going away for the weekend, which was a bare-faced lie. But how could I possibly tell him that my wife had attempted to murder my own son? I knew my wife did not have a mental condition. I had experienced the wrath of her superhuman strength that morning, seen how her face had morphed and changed, how she suddenly spoke to me in Latin, a language that my wife has never spoken before a day in her life, not to mention how her eyes became as black as coal. They were glaring at me. Those were not my wife's eyes. They were the eyes of the devil himself. In truth, I was terrified of what my wife was becoming before my very eyes. What man should be frightened of his own wife? I was beside myself with what I should do. On the surface she appeared so normal. If I told anyone she was possessed, would they even believe me? When I returned home, Sophia was behaving nonchalantly, as if nothing had happened. "What the hell were you doing?" I shouted at her. "You tried to drown Harris in the bathtub. What the hell is wrong with you, woman? Do you want me to get you committed?" "What are you talking about?" she said to me. "Why would you say such things? I'd never ever harm a child of ours. How could you even say that? I love the bones of both our boys. I would never ever hurt them. I can't believe you would even say such things." I realized in that moment of sober reflection that when my wife was taken over by a demonic entity, she had absolutely no memory of the event at all. How could I even tell her what was happening to her when she was oblivious to the demon that was living inside her? I was now living on tenterhooks with my wife. The following night I woke up to find myself being physically strangled by her. A man's raspy voice came out of her throat as she wrapped her fingers around my neck that was squeezing me so hard. "What have you done to my children?" she said, shaking me violently. "What have you done to my children?" The force that was holding me down was not my wife. She does not possess that kind of physical strength. She was so strong, I was powerless to get her clawing fingers around my neck that was squeezing me so hard that all the breath was expunged from me. Once again she said to me, "What have you done to my children? I'm going to kill you, and then I shall kill them. I will kill you all." Finally she let go of my neck and returned to bed, as if nothing had happened. But she came close to strangling me to death, and for days afterwards there were dark bruises around my neck. Most of the time my wife was normal in our marriage, but I could not trust her an inch with our children. So I wisely hired a permanent babysitter. I confided in the woman that there was something seriously wrong with their mother, and under no circumstances should my wife be left alone with any of our children. I hinted that she might harm our kids. I think the carer thought my wife was suffering from Munchausen's by Hopsy, or by Propsy, whatever you call it. But I knew it was something infinitely worse than that. My wife was undisputably possessed by a demon. But how do you tell anyone that? I did send her to counselling, but that failed to work. The psychologists claimed that she was of sound mind, that there was nothing at all wrong with her. That's exactly what I expected them to say. I surreptitiously organised for a Catholic priest to come and do an exorcism on my wife. It was very discreet, because it had not been authorised by the Catholic Church. They take far too long, requiring far too much red tape to get through, before a legitimate exorcism is permitted. Time was not on my side. It was running out fast. I needed immediate help. The moment Father Parlow entered our home, the demon in my wife began to hiss, sputter, and mockingly taunt him. She literally mocked and laughed at the priest, telling him to suck all his body parts, using every filthy word in the book that I do not dare repeat. Her language was foul. We had to tie my wife to a chair, bind her hands and feet tightly. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. But it was not my wife that was sitting in that chair, but a powerful demonic entity. I had seen exorcisms on television movies before, but they were nothing on this. The filth that came out of my wife's mouth was so unsanitary. It made me physically squirm. It would never have been appreciated by a television audience. I could not believe such contemptuously hideous words could come out of anyone's mouth, let alone anyone as sweet as my wife. And in that instant I despised her for what she had become, for in my eyes she was no longer my wife, but a devil, for an uninvited house guest that seemed hell-bent on remaining in occupancy had literally taken her over. "Who are you?" asked the priest. "Who are you? Give me your name. I command you to give me your name in the name of Jesus Christ." "I'm not going to give you my name," said my wife, spitting and cursing at the priest. "You call yourself a man of God, but I know all your dirty secrets. You don't fool me. You don't scare me." "I command you by the blood of Jesus to tell me who you are," said the priest, defiantly holding up the cross and sprinkling my wife with holy water. She let out a scream, as if the water had burnt her. She began to spit contemptuously at the priest. She was rocking backwards and forwards in the chair, trying to pull her hands and feet away from their incarceration. She was so strong, she ripped the material that had bound her hands and feet to the chair. I was completely gobsmacked by how strong she had become. "My name is Mammon. Happy now? Now that you know my name? You'll never get me to come out of her. She doesn't even know I exist. That's half the idea. She's so weak, so pathetic, so insipid. I have her completely under my control. Her body is all mine. She is mine. By the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, I command you to come out of this woman now, Mammon. You are the spirit of greed. You have no place here. You need to leave now, out of her now." "I will not come out of her. You hear me? You'll have to kill her first to get rid of me," came a loud cackle. My wife's restraints had come loose. The next thing I knew, she was crawling up the wall with the priest underneath her body. My wife was literally climbing a wall like a spider. I have no idea how she was capable of doing that. Finally, she dragged the gasping priest on the floor with her hands. She was squeezing his neck like she had done mine. "Get out of here," she screamed at him, "or I will kill you and all of your family." Finally, my wife released her hold on the priest, telling him to go or she'd kill him then and there. So he just got up on his feet and ran like a March hare back to his car, his eyes wide with terror, his legs crumbling beneath him. Finally, he phoned me later that day, informing me that the only way for me to get rid of the demon was to kill my wife. Make it look like an accident. "I am very sorry, Mr. Ferris, but I cannot help you any more. You are going to have to think of something to outsmart this demon. It is getting stronger and stronger. Your wife will soon be consumed by it." "But I can't possibly kill my wife. That's insane." "Your wife is imprisoned by this evil entity, Mr. Ferris. He is sucking her dry. She will only be freed from him in death. He is way too strong for her now. Your children are in mortal danger. So are you. You need to do something, and something fast. You will not be the first, Mr. Ferris, nor will you be the last that I have given this sagacious advice to. Your wife very nearly killed me today, as she very nearly killed you recently, and she nearly killed your son Harris. You will be next if you're not careful. For the time being, Don't let your kids anywhere near her. They are in grave danger. I must warn you that your wife will revert back to her normal self, so you will find it almost impossible to kill her. But that is because the demon is manipulating you. He's using your emotional connection to your wife to his full advantage. But you must remember, your wife is virtually dead already. Surely you can cast the demon out with the word of God. Isn't that what you people are supposed to do? Can't you possibly help me? You have to help me. You can't leave me high and dry like this. I'm desperate. Mr. Ferris, you saw what happened to me. Next time the demon will kill me. I don't think my faith is strong enough to defeat him. I've succeeded before, but this time the demon is too strong for me. I can't help you. Isn't there someone else who could help me? Surely there is someone. There has to be. By the time you've gone through all the legal paperwork with the Catholic Church, Mr. Ferris, you will be dead. So will your children. It's a long, laborious process with far too much red tape. And your wife, well, she is so possessed. When it comes to performing an exorcism with a professional, it's probably already too late for her. The damage has been done. Who's to know if the exorcist that helps you can even overcome this demon? It's incredibly unlikely, but the choice is yours. But I'm giving you the best advice I know to give. It is not the kind of advice you want to hear, but to destroy the demon, Mr. Ferris, you need to kill your wife, to deprive the demon of the host body he is currently occupying, which is your wife's. It was then that I decided the best way to dispose of my wife was on a cruise liner. I reminded myself that killing her would be saving the lives of my children, but even then, I did not know if I could go through with it. I was no murderer. I loved my wife, but despised the demon within her. I tried to tell her about the fact that sometimes I thought she was possessed by an evil entity, that I had called a priest over to remove a demon from her. There was a demon within her that had made his presence known to me. She genuinely did not know what I was talking about. She did admit that she had memory blanks, but beyond that, she had no idea that she was the host to a grievously wicked demonic entity, and thought I was making the whole thing up, like some kind of warped sick joke. I mean, as if I would do that. When I told her we were going on a cruise liner, she was naturally ecstatic about the idea. "You're such a romantic," she told me. "What have I done to deserve this?" She was so sweet to me. I genuinely was beginning to believe that the despicable demon inside her had at long last gone. I had my beloved wife back with me. My children were now safe. But the priest's words haunted me, for he had reminded me that the demon would retreat into the shadows, so that I would falsely believe I had my wife back, when it was all just a duplicitous lie. He reminded me that the devil comes to kill, steal, and destroy, for he is the father of lies. I prayed long and hard to God about what I must do. If I must destroy the demon, let me see that it is still there in my wife. We were having such a wonderful time together on the cruise liner, and not once did I get a hint that there was still a demon living inside my wife. It was only when we were on the deck, and some children were innocently playing games together, that I turned around to look directly at my wife. Her eyes had gone completely black. One of the children looked horrified and ran a mile away. The look on her face was grievously evil, as if she wanted to take possession of one of those children. I did not want the demon in my wife to know I had seen it, so I acted nonchalantly, as if everything was perfectly normal. I knew in that moment the demon had not left her. It was on the third night of the trip that I encouraged my wife to get inebriated. I kept filling her wine glass with more and more alcohol, and then I persuaded her, after a midnight snack on the cruise liner, for us to take a leisurely walk on the deck. My wife could barely stand up straight. "You're very drunk," I told her, You're swaggering all over the place." "No, I'm not drunk," she chuckled. "Oh, but you are," I said. "You could never balance on those railings over there. You'd fall straight into the sea if you tried that." My wife continued to swagger all over the place, and she seemed up for the challenge. She always was the kind of woman that rose to a challenge. "No, you silly. I can walk straight. Look at me. I can walk straight. My balance is great," she chuckled. "Then prove it to me," I said. "I don't believe you can do it. You're a great gymnast when you're sober, but like this, you can't stand straight. Why don't you prove it to me? Climb up on those rails, and we shall see." My wife giggled. She obediently ambled over to the banisters, proceeded to climb up on the railing. "See, I'm not so drunk," she said with her arms outstretched like a bird. "My balance is perfect. Look at me. I can fly. I can fly like a bird. Look at me." "Look behind you. There's something there," I said. My wife turned around to look behind her. Losing her footing, she plundered into the murky depths of the sea. And what did I do? I walked away, my heart heavy with regret. I felt so much remorse and grief for what I had done, but I also felt such relief, as finally the demon had gone from our lives. I could only hope my wife was set free from its treacherous hold over her life. I was grateful my plan had worked. I had hoped I would not have to push her over the railing, and thankfully I did not. But if needs must, I would have done what I had to do in order to protect my children. I am only grateful that nobody doubted it was an accident, and a couple of people reported my inebriated wife staggering all over the restaurant at midnight. It was not the first time a drunk person had flung themselves off the railing of a ship, nor was it likely to be the last. For some people, when they're drunk or high on drugs, think they can actually walk on the moon, and my wife was no exception to that rule. The truth was she was the one that flung herself off the railings, without even a push from me. But I had walked away, and not even called for help, and I knew I would have to live with my nagging conscience forever.
When I read my father's diary, I was naturally quite startled by the contents. I could not believe what I was reading. I'd heard of demonic possession before, of course I had, but I didn't actually consider it real. It was spoken about a lot in the Old Testament for sure, but did that kind of stuff really go on in modern-day America? My father would never harm a fly, so for him to be persuaded to do something like this, I could only assume meant that my father must have considered my mother a genuine threat to our lives. What would any husband do if he saw his own wife trying to drown their kid in the bathtub, and you needed to ensure your wife got help and your children were not in danger under her charge? What if your wife gets a sound bill of health and no one believes you that she's come under the stronghold of a demonic possession, especially when your own wife is oblivious to what is happening to her? What do you do then? Beat your head against a brick wall? Run for the hills? By the sounds of things, I was lucky to be alive, for had my dad not walked past the bathroom when my mother was thrusting me under the water, God forbid, I wouldn't even be here now. How had my father coped living with a woman possessed by a demon, that the priest had even fled with terror from the house, claiming that if my dad did not kill my mother, my father could lose his entire family? It was more than a little startling, to say the least. I believe my dad did what he thought best in the circumstances, but I am in no doubt that it completely devastated his life. My father's diary was full of the struggles he had had to go through, the dreadful guilt that had plagued his entire life. And after me and my brother left home, my father sank into a deep depression. One of the accounts in his diary left me with 3 words: what the hell?
July the 18th, 2015. This was the day that I had finished tying up all my loose ends. I was intent on killing myself. This was not a decision I was undertaking lightly, by any manner of means. When the boys were young, I thought of a way out like this all the time, but my kids desperately needed me, and I could not abandon them, like my mother had me. A large part of me died when the woman I loved sank to the depths of the sea. I was the one that encouraged her to climb the railing of that ocean liner, knowing all too well she'd likely fall to her death. When my wife was a young girl, she'd been a formidable gymnast, but her nimbleness and agility were flung out of the window when she was inebriated. I knew when she climbed onto those railings she'd lose her footing, and she did. After my wife drowned, I went to see the father again. He informed me of another client of his, who had contacted him to exorcise his daughter from a demonic stronghold. The man was given similar advice by the pastor after the exorcism catastrophically failed. You need to kill your daughter, he was told, to save your entire family. By the time the Catholic Church are satisfied your daughter is indeed possessed by a demon, it might be all too late for you. Your daughter is a host for this demon, and it is getting too strong for me to cast out. The father refused to kill his daughter. 2 weeks later, that poor family was bludgeoned to death by the demon in their daughter. She ended up being shot by the police after the neighbours heard all the frantic screams. No one realized that this girl who'd killed her entire family, including her parents and 2 brothers, was due to a demonic possession. Instead, the newspapers reported that she was mentally unstable, for no one dares discuss the subject of demonic possession. But even the crime scene cleaners that entered that house claimed they'd never seen so much blood and carnage like that before. Chairs were broken, ceilings were cracked, walls had large holes in them, as if someone had hammered them with a fist, and there was green gunge that could not be identified running down the walls like blood. For weeks after the house was cleaned up, it still smelt of death and decay. It was impossible to sell. It had to be bulldozed. The story offers me no comfort to come to terms with what I had to do that fateful day. But if I had not done what I did, I doubt me or my sons would be alive. I decided on this day, the 18th of July 2015, that I was going to blow my head off with my 9mm Glock revolver, being fired in the side of my head. I didn't want my children to find my deceased rotting corpse in the cabin, as that would sabotage the blissful memories of their childhood home, spent here in the Blue Mountains. I had a neater, far more reliable plan up my sleeve. I had written them a letter to apologize for what I had done. I explained that I was killing myself because I felt responsible for my wife's death, which is very true. I didn't go into details, of course. I mean, what was the point? Some secrets are best left buried. I left my 2 beloved boys a note, telling them that I loved them very much, and that I was truly sorry for what I had done. It was an annoyingly beautiful day to decide to kill myself, but I was so tired of being tormented by the haunting memories of that night on the cruise liner, when I had contributed to my wife's fortuitous passing. With so much time to myself these days, my restless insomnia was getting worse and worse. I needed a way out. I really did. From the confined, claustrophobic cocoon of my grief that swaddled me from every side. In a desolate oppression, I made my bed that morning, so it looked presentable, washed up my breakfast things after me, left a note for my kids under the magnet on the fridge, left the key for the front door under the terracotta pot, where it could easily be found. I'm not sure what time in the morning it was, and frankly, I didn't even care. I no longer had to concern myself with such trivial nonsense. I was going to a place where time was just an illusion. I had eaten a big plate of bacon and eggs, washed down with cappuccino coffee. I then proceeded on my way, down the long woodland trail, very frustrated that everything had to be so damn pretty this morning. The wood grove was particularly prepossessing. as if everything was swathed in a soft gossamer light. Maybe I was appreciating all this, as I was suddenly becoming more alive than I had been for a long time, because I was closing in the end of my life, and my senses were absorbing every detail of the landscape with an ardent appreciation like never before. I enjoyed the feeling of kicking up the leaves with my boots, smelling the woodsy smells in the grove, along with the pleasant chirruping sounds of the birds' song. Before long I came to the place where I was going to blow my brains out. I had chosen to do this under a prepossessing oak tree. I had loved this tree all my life. It had boughs so large that it stretched out widely, as if I was being given an all-encompassing hug. I sat down on the ground with my knees resting under my chin, while I played with the pistol in my hand. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, breathing in the forest, and when I looked up, I discovered to my amazement that I was not alone. 2 huge male Bigfoots were standing in front of me, staring at me with wide treacle-colour eyes. In that moment I was hoping they would kill me. Then I wouldn't have to pull the trigger myself. I just wished they'd bloody do it quickly and get it over with. For as long as I'd lived in the Blue Ridge Mountains, I had heard of such idiosyncratic creatures before, living in the forests of North America. But personally, I'd never witnessed one myself. And now when I'm about to blow my brains out, who should come crawling out of the woodwork but 2 male Bigfoot of all things? The way they were staring at me, they were not best pleased with me. Indeed, they both were wearing lugubrious expressions of great indignance on their faces, as if I'd done something quite terrible. They stared at me very silently for a long time, and I stared back at them. Honestly, if I was not so intent on killing myself, I'd have been terrified by these creatures. But instead, I was surprisingly calm. The 2 Bigfoot were built like great big army tanks, with powerful arms and legs so sturdy, and bodies covered in long dark hair, the colour of coal. Their faces were so human, but rather reminded me of Indian warriors, with their hooded eyes and high cheekbones and flat noses. To my amazement, one of the male Bigfoot spoke to me and said, "Linata kolati laqui, hosanikali no ko, linatika sikwashi, holantikani." "What the hell do you think you are doing?" His voice boomed so powerfully that it echoed through the trees, causing my body to quiver and shake. I'd never heard a powerful voice like that before. I was baffled that his alien language was literally downloaded into my head in English. I did not answer the Bigfoot, because I knew they both knew exactly what I was doing. These outer-worldly creatures could read my very thoughts. I knew that at once. I just stammered a whole bunch of I. The Bigfoot continued. "Gelani kasikwa, potan sikaniglo, hisati lakwa, hola kilani, hampasikatolo, mi fashika." You destroyed a great evil once to protect your family. Now you want this evil to destroy you? Is that what this is about? How dare you think you have the right to take your own life? Has there not been enough destruction in your life already? Look at you. You're pathetic. Your life is hanging around you in bits. Pick up the pieces. Stop whining like a baby. Be a man. Killing yourself makes you a coward. A real coward. Motalika, hokanikika, lotola pisaki, no koala. But you don't understand. I killed my wife. Kolatikalako, nasikalakwani. Nonsense. You killed a demon. Your wife was long gone, said the Bigfoot. But how can you know this? How can you possibly know this? You know nothing about me, I said. Kola kilakwani, likasikani kolopa. I can see things you would never comprehend possible. But I will tell you this. The day you threw your wife into the ocean, you set her free. You saved your family. Now you want to destroy yourself. Is that it?
The Bigfoot removed my Glock pistol from my hand, breaking it apart as if it was nothing.
If I ever see you in the forest with this thing and this self-pitying attitude, there'll be hell to pay. Kalikakwa, hompasika, linatakwa.
The other Bigfoot nodded in agreement, and then they both stomped out of the wood grove, and when I returned home to the cabin, I was relieved to be alive, but baffled at the bizarre, idiosyncratic encounter that I had with those Bigfoots. How could they know so much about me? But I decided I'm going to live my life to the fullest. Those Bigfoots were right. My wife was just a host to a demon. And it was the demon that fell to her death from the ocean liner, not my wife. I closed my father's diary, threw it all into the incinerator, setting it alight. "Your secret's safe with me, Dad," I said. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, I don't know what to say. What an incredible story. I cannot imagine what it must be like to be desperately trying to help a loved one when they're possessed by a demon. And I do know that it is incredibly hard to actually get someone from the Catholic Church to come out. You have to go through all this red tape before they can actually agree to do an exorcism on, your loved one. And what happens if it's too late? And I think we've learnt about that in this story. What an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.